In today's UMD Media's Understanding and Measuring Research and Education series, we will cover a paper published in the Journal of Political Geography by Teklehaymanot Weldemichel from the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. The Tigray War, which erupted in November 2020, stands as one of the deadliest conflicts of the 21st century, yet it largely failed to garner significant global attention. This conflict, spanning from November 2020 to November 2022, involved the Ethiopian federal government and its allies against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. This research paper delves into how mass violence in Tigray was rendered invisible, despite widespread atrocities and a staggering death toll. The paper highlights the deliberate strategies employed to obscure the true scale and nature of the conflict from international scrutiny. The study critically examines the strategies and tactics employed by the Ethiopian government and its allies to create a zone of invisibility around the conflict. These tactics included controlling information, manipulating narratives, and restricting access to the region. The methodology involved a comprehensive review of documents, social media, media reports, and official statements from various actors. This extensive data collection allowed for a detailed analysis of the information landscape surrounding the war and the mechanisms of its invisibilization. Key findings reveal the immense scale of violence, including organized massacres, systematic sexual violence, and forced displacement. These atrocities were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a broader pattern of violence aimed at the Tigrayan population. Estimates suggest up to 800,000 people were killed, making it the deadliest conflict of the 21st century, yet it received minimal global attention. This stark contrast between the death toll and international awareness underscores the effectiveness of the invisibilization strategies. One primary tactic was contextual invisibility, achieved through communication blackouts and internet shutdowns lasting over 2 years. These blackouts effectively cut off Tigray from the rest of the world, preventing information about the conflict from reaching external audiences. These blackouts were the longest recorded in history, effectively isolating the region from the outside world. The deliberate disruption of communication infrastructure made it nearly impossible for independent journalists or human rights organizations to report on the unfolding crisis. Access for independent media and humanitarian agencies was severely restricted, preventing external scrutiny. This restriction of access was a critical component of the strategy to control the narrative and prevent independent verification of events on the ground. Infrastructure, including telecom networks, power supply, and transportation, was systematically targeted and disrupted. This destruction not only crippled the region, but also served to further isolate it, making it harder for people to flee or for aid to arrive. This infrastructural warfare aimed to sabotage the enemy's societal base and control information flow. By destroying essential services, the perpetrators sought to weaken the Tigrayan population and prevent any organized resistance or communication.
Evidence of atrocities, often filmed by soldiers themselves, was suppressed, with warnings issued against sharing such information. This active suppression of evidence further contributed to the invisibility of the violence, as direct proof was systematically hidden or destroyed.
Geographical isolation, coupled with the annexation of strategic territories like Western Tigray, further limited escape routes and refugee outflow. The physical barriers and territorial changes made it incredibly difficult for civilians to seek safety, trapping many within the conflict zone. Epistemic invisibility was another crucial tactic, framing the Tigrayan population as rebels or a cancer in the body politic. This dehumanizing rhetoric was used to justify the violence and diminish international sympathy for the victims. This dehumanizing rhetoric normalized violence and dampened calls for international intervention. By portraying Tigrayans as a threat, the Ethiopian government and its allies sought to legitimize their actions and deflect criticism from the international community. The Ethiopian government actively denied the presence of Eritrean forces despite overwhelming evidence of their involvement in atrocities. This denial was a key part of the strategy to control the narrative and avoid accountability for the widespread human rights abuses. Racialized victim hierarchies and geopolitical interests also contributed, with Western media often biased towards the Ethiopian government.
This bias meant that the suffering of Tigrayans was often downplayed or ignored, while other conflicts received more prominent coverage. The concept of necropolitics highlights the power to dictate who lives and dies, rendering certain lives as bare life, and thus invisible or justifiable. This framework helps explain how the lives of Tigrayans were devalued, making their suffering easier to ignore. This framework helps understand why violence against certain groups goes unnoticed or is rationalized. In the context of Tigray, necropolitics allowed for the systematic targeting and killing of civilians with little to no international outcry. The paper concludes that the invisibility of the Tigray War was a deliberate production, not an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated effort to conceal the true nature and scale of the conflict from the global public. It was achieved through a combination of media control, diplomatic maneuvering, and geopolitical calculations. These interconnected strategies worked in concert to create a veil of silence around the atrocities committed in Tigray. The study calls for decolonial approaches to understanding violence geographies, urging recognition of Tigray as a site of genocidal mass violence. This recognition is crucial for challenging existing power structures and ensuring that such atrocities are not repeated. Justice for the victims is paramount, as the current mechanisms for accountability are largely controlled by the very perpetrators. This situation creates a profound imbalance, where those responsible for the violence are also in charge of investigating it. This resembles a form of victor's justice, where those responsible for crimes escape genuine accountability. Without independent mechanisms, the cycle of impunity is likely to continue, denying victims the justice they deserve. The paper underscores the urgent need for independent investigations and mechanisms to ensure justice and prevent future atrocities. Such measures are essential for breaking the cycle of violence and holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. Recognizing the Tigray War's true nature is a critical step towards healing and preventing similar, invisible conflicts. By acknowledging the deliberate invisibilization of this conflict, we can work towards a future where such atrocities are brought to light and addressed.